It's amazing how in past years, typically when you're running for president, foreign policy is a huge, huge issue. Clearly, the Republicans do not care about this when it comes to Herman Cain. He did an interview with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and his answer on the question of President Obama and Libya was absolutely baffling. Here's a taste of what he had to say.
So you agreed with President Obama on Libya or not?
Okay, Libya. President Obama supported the uprising, correct? President Obama called for the removal of Gaddafi. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing before I say, yes, I agreed, I know I didn't agree. I do not agree with the way he handled it for the following reason. No, that's a different one. I got to go back and see. Got all this stuff twirling around in my head. Specifically, what are you asking me? Did I agree or not disagree with Obama?
That wasn't the whole thing. But I'm sorry to say, well, a lot of things are happening in my brain. That just made absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Let's remember, let's remind ourselves, this is a man who is running for president because he wanted to sell books. Let's remember that his campaign schedule has been built around, or was built around, whatever the largest book-selling hubs were. Herman Cain has never been a serious presidential candidate. Herman Cain...
No stops at Tripoli, huh?
Well, Herman Cain, I think I can say this unequivocally, he never thought he would be in this situation, meaning that he would be the #3 front runner for the Republican nomination. Let's be very honest about this. The problem is that his staff put him in that situation because they know, quite frankly, that he's only running for president in order to sell books.
But why
that was embarrassing.
In poll after poll after poll, Robert, he's sitting at the top. Clearly, there are other Republicans out there who are saying, hey, this is the guy.
Absolutely. There's two reasons why. There's two reasons why. One is because the Republicans are not particularly happy with their field, so they're shifting all over the place. We saw that with Michelle Bachmann. We saw that when they tried to bring Chris Christie in the race. We saw that with Mitch Daniels. The second reason why, Herman Cain reminds me a lot of Ross Perot. He's a straight-talking individual, and more Americans out there are saying, you know what? I'm not sure I agree with everything that he says, but at least I understand what he's saying.
Sophia?
No.
Well, we didn't understand that.
Well, that's
different. Two things. I agree with Robert that he's an accidental candidate. He never thought he'd be at the top of his field. He doesn't have a serious organization. He didn't have the funding before the sexual harassment scandal started, ironically. But I think that the bigger issue is how this reflects on black conservatives, and that's what I want to talk about. Herman Cain is an embarrassment. He is ill-prepared. He's ill-tempered. He now has Secret Service protection because he has skirmishes with the media. He's setting all the wrong examples for what it is to be a serious national candidate in the Republican Party as a black conservative, and I think he's going to do irreparable damage in terms of the legacy he's leaving.
Joe.
But what about the fact that the Republican Party has shifted so far to the right that Herman Cain can get traction with this kind of a message? I mean, to me, it says more about the fact that the Republican Party is seeking for an ideologically pure candidate, which they probably will never find, that can also win the general election.
I must remind everyone, this is no different from 2007 when we had this very same conversation with a lot of folks were saying that the Democratic Party was going far to the left. This is what primaries are all about.
Okay, the Democrats did not have a Herman Cain running in 2000.
But to his point, but to his point about the ideological differences, that's what primaries are all about. 2004, we had the same exact conversation whether or not Howard Dean was too liberal as opposed to John Kerry. So to make that argument is not.
But at least with Howard Dean, you had a politician who had experience. You had somebody in the Democratic not necessarily.
First you said philosophical differences. Now you're saying experience.
Well,
Those are two different things.
But philosophically, his experience is based almost solely on the fact that he ran a Fortune 500 company.
Newsflash: Herman Cain is not going to be our next Republican nominee, nor is he going to be the next president.
But the point is that he's being taken seriously by a lot of people.
We all know that Cain won't be the next president, but what we
we have to do is we can't disrespect those who support Herman Cain,
Absolutely.
because the reality is that even in the black community, many families have uncles that remind them of Herman Cain. Yeah,
In the attic.
Right, the uncle is in the attic.
Thanksgiving coming up.
Right. And I think I can think of members of my own family who really, really like Herman Cain, see him as a breath of fresh air, because they are black folks up in the church who are not comfortable with the liberal agenda.
Now, I'll tell you what, you talked about a breath of fresh air. Folks thought that was going to be Governor Rick Perry. Here's an ad that he released this week that criticized President Barack Obama, bringing back the old socialist term.
We've been a little bit lazy, I think, over the last couple of decades.
Can you believe that? That's what our president thinks wrong with America? That Americans are lazy? That's pathetic. It's time to clean house in Washington. It's time for a balanced budget amendment that forces Washington to stop overspending. If Congress balks, cut their pay, send them home. Obama's socialist policies are bankrupting America. We must stop him now.
No surprise there. Governor Rick Perry and Republicans are absolutely lying about what the president said, totally taking out of context. He was very clear when he was talking about Americans not being aggressive and going after foreign investment. Now they're saying, oh, he's calling Americans lazy. Why is it that Americans are uncomfortable when somebody finally tells us the truth about how we sometimes behave?
Oh, and that's human nature. Humans are uncomfortable when you tell us the truth about how we act. None of us likes to be checked, so that's not a surprise.
Well, also, too, but to Sophia's point, it's the antithesis of what a president should be in many Americans' minds. Americans, I believe, think that, you know what, our president should be our cheerleader-in-chief. Our president should be bringing us up as opposed to pushing us down. And so anytime you hear...
How about real talk?
Hold on. So anytime
Let's stop lying to ourselves.
Hold on. So anytime you hear a president say anything negative like that, and let me give you a prime example. When Bill Clinton said, you know what, Americans are in a funk, a lot of people got upset with him. When Ronald Reagan said, you know what, Americans, we really need to wake up and smell the coffee, a lot of people got upset with him.
Well, guess what? Those Americans who are upset by that need to shut the hell up and realize they're being honest. Why is it? This makes no sense to me when we are so delusional as Americans that we don't like it when there's honesty. I think part of our problem is we walk around so arrogant as we're the best in the world. We're God's country. When you look at our reading scores, our math scores, our science scores, lack of engineers, nobody wants to own up to it. And I think Americans need to stop this crap of how dare he call us lazy. He said we were lazy to think that people are just going to come here and just invest in companies. We don't have to work for it. We don't have to sell it. Right. It's the same Americans who say we don't need to compete in the global world. They all want to come here. Well, guess what? Money's going to China. Money's going to Asia. It's going to Africa. And we're sitting here being arrogant saying, hey, we're the best in the world.
And no community's getting hit harder than the African American and the brown community in terms of lack of next generation technology jobs, tech transfer. You know, they just did a special Silicon Valley and the VC capital that was done on Black in America. And so you have a situation where I think you're absolutely right. And the president's absolutely right to call us out on this because no community is getting hit harder in that lack of access than we are.
If our country hits a downfall, two things that are going to destroy us are, one, very arrogant, sloppy foreign policy where we are causing untold countless tragedies all around the world and creating armies of people who want to see us destroyed because of that arrogance that you referred to. Number two is this relentless commitment to unregulated, undisciplined capitalism, which ultimately, and I can speak to this as a finance professor, that's all we teach is capitalism 101. Capitalism is very powerful, but if you do not regulate it carefully, then it ultimately destroys your society because you create an imbalanced wealth distribution like we're creating in the United States. And the problem with the Republican argument in Perry's conversation is this sort of belief that if you don't believe in hardcore unregulated capitalism, oh, you must be a socialist.
I sat there and I watched the last Republican debate where nearly every candidate refused to hold the banks accountable when it came to the economic crisis. They all attacked Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Ron Paul and John Huntsman were the only two who had anything to say about the bank's role in all of this. And the whole argument was we should free up regulation. And I'm going, wow, that really got us in the present situation that we're in.
Yeah, we tried that. Right. It failed. The new standard has to be come up with. Occupy Wall Street is trying to push that conversation. Right. They're pushing that conversation not only on the left, but also the right has to acknowledge that they do have a point.